welcome. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah,
awesome.
We can.
Awesome. Welcome. So this is what's new in contributing to Microsoft Learn. We're going to talk a lot about how to contribute to Microsoft Learn docs, including Fabric docs, which I work on. And we're going to talk about how this can benefit you in your career. And we're going to actually dive quite a bit into GitHub to show you how Microsoft uses GitHub to publish docs as well. So I hope this is going to be interesting from a variety of angles for you. My name is William Assaf. I'm a former data platform MVP for Microsoft. Joined Microsoft about 4 years ago, and now I work on a database documentation team in Microsoft Learn. I'm primarily responsible for Fabric documentation for the data warehouse workload, as well as Azure SQL Database and a bunch of other topics as well. I'm based out of Redmond, Washington, where Microsoft is headquartered. But I grew up and spent a lot of time and earned my MVP in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I organized SQL Saturday Baton Rouge, which was one of the larger SQL Saturdays in the world before pandemic. And so if you're a member of the technical community, if you're an organizer in the technical community, thank you for doing what you do. The pandemic was really rough on user groups, technical communities, both virtual and physical. So thanks. Olivier, for doing this. Thanks everybody else for helping to be an organizer or just to be part of an online or physical technical community, because we need those. Those were very influential in my career. I owe a lot of my career networking and success to my local technical community back in Louisiana, and I still try to be involved as much as I can, physically and virtually. So let's talk about we're going to talk more about career stuff too. So thank you for joining. Here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about how to contribute to Microsoft's open source docs as code approach in GitHub and what you need to know to become a contributor to the docs and all the different ways to contribute too. There's lots of different ways. First thing you need to know is that you'll need a github.com account to contribute if you don't have one already. I was a DBA. I had a GitHub account, but we only published like a toolbox of a lot of our things on GitHub publicly. So I was very much a lightweight user of GitHub, and I used just like the GitHub desktop and the GitHub website. And you can do all of that. Now I've pretty deep into Git and GitHub, obviously, in Microsoft, and I use that every day. But it's okay. I understand if you're a data person that you don't have a GitHub account because you think GitHub accounts are for devs. Well, that's not quite true. You should still have a GitHub account. You can do a lot of things with your GitHub account, so you can get involved. One of the things you can do is you can give us feedback through pull requests. For corrections and edits on the docs and things like that. And then the entire community can benefit from it. That's just one of the ways I'm going to talk about today about how you can get involved. You might find this rewarding for your career, your MVP activity reports. If you're an MVP or an aspiring MVP, this is all very much applicable to that experience. You might find it valuable for your personal brand, your blog, your social media, so forth. So throughout this presentation, I really want this to be interactive. I have the chat coming up on the side. Feel free to raise your hand, come on video, come off of mute to ask questions at any time. We also have time for Q&A at the end, but I welcome your interactivity. So on the database docs team that I work on, we work with product groups like Stan and program managers for everything SQL Server, including all the various flavors of SQL Server in Azure, as well as Microsoft Fabric and all the technologies under that umbrella. We also cover a lot of content for data platform tooling like Management Studio and Azure Data Studio and VS Code. And we're called the Database Docs team because we also cover open source Azure SQL, Azure Database for MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, and Cosmos DB as well. But we're just one content team, and while I'm going to throw in a lot of data platform specifics because I know this is a data platform type of audience, this is actually talking about all Microsoft technologies for all Microsoft documentation. So Microsoft Docs are not Wikipedia. Right? We're not open to all edits. There is a process. We do have hundreds of thousands of articles of those, so we want to embrace the wisdom of you and the technical user community to help maintain a high level of quality. Opening up the docs to external contributors is part of how we scale. So let me get your mind going with a bunch of ideas first to how to contribute to Learn content, and then we'll talk about other ways to use the Learn edit. We'll talk about some other ways as well. Keep in mind, these ideas are ways to contribute content and engagement to Microsoft Learn, and all of this contributes to your Microsoft MVP activity report and is looked at, and I'm not going to talk much more about the MVP program, but all of this is looked at qualitatively, not quantitatively. I'll say that. Something that is a really good edit, really good suggestion, that is significant. Not necessarily in length or detail, but it's just a good quality edit versus like a typo fix or something like that, or like, I think you should capitalize this. We're looking for quality, not quantity, and I can tell you that from the MVP program. Okay, so you can contribute answers to Learn on Q&A for responding and updating answers with better solutions. You'll find that some answers are either incomplete or maybe they've changed because products have changed or features have changed. Updating one of those is a really great way to contribute. You can create and socialize your public Learn collections, and this is where you can gather up docs. And if you haven't used Learn collections, by the way, on that website, and I'll show you how exactly to do this. I'm going to walk through the site real quickly. You can put together not just Learn articles, but you can put together modules, you can put together external links, you can put together Q&A answers, all on a single topic. Put that in a collection, and then you can share that publicly, social media, your blog. And so it's possible to recommend a learning solution for other resources, for all sorts of different resources put together in Microsoft Learn, all this one package about how to go learn about this or that, or a project you're working on, or a problem that you solved. That can be really useful, and it can be something you could socialize. And this is, you can create a Learn plan. This is something that was actually recently introduced. You can create a Learn plan of existing Learn training modules to put those together in a custom way, all on your own. So for example, the Learn training needed for a given job or a project or a certification. You can put together, obviously there's Learn plans for specific exams and things like that, but you can put together a learning plan, then have others sign up for it, and you can track their own progress. As a manager or a team lead, there's built-in reporting functionality, email notifications. So you could assign Learn modules and track your team's progress. So already there's a lot of official Microsoft Learn developed learning plans for a variety of career paths in the Microsoft Learn site, but you can just find that at learn.microsoft.com/training/career paths, and you can see all of the information about the different career paths that we have content for. There's also let's see, finally, what we're talking about today, let's see, what do I want to talk about next? The contributing to open source documents on GitHub. This is how you're going to interact with me on the database docs team. This is how you're going to interact with anybody on any other content team for any other topic, including, because Fabric is this amoeba that has consumed everything inside Microsoft technology. Fabric actually has many different content teams around it. The data warehouse team, the data engineering team, the data factory team, the Power BI team, the real-time engineering team. These are all different content teams. So the way you interact with them is through GitHub, and it's through GitHub open source pull requests. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to walk you through the example of how to do that. It's going to be very easy. You'll see how it's just you can do it all through the browser, nothing to download, nothing to install. And so let's talk about which articles that you could contribute to. So like if you want to contribute to docs, but you don't know where to get started, you don't have like an awesome error that you have found or a bug that you have found in docs, which articles? Take this as a call to action then. You'll see that we have these colorful note boxes. So sometimes they're caution or important or tip. These colorful boxes, those are a great way to contribute. If there was something in that article that you were reading that you think we should link to, or you think that we should mention, or like a big caveat or a warning or a tip that would make something easier, those are a great way to contribute. Just a caveat on those. The colorful note boxes we have found, if you overuse them or if you stack a whole bunch of them next to each other, customers don't read them. If there's one on the page and customer, well, oh, I should read this. It looks important. But if it's a whole bunch, then it's a whole bunch of noise and it's cognitive noise. So we don't want to overuse those colorful note boxes, but that's a great way to contribute something, to call out something that, hey, is not maybe directly in this article, but it could be something that somebody should be aware of. Something that maybe somebody pointed out in a Q&A could become a really good note or an important article addition. So you can try to add or enhance existing sample scripts that we have, for example. Placing a helpful comment inside the code and outside the code. Code snippets are great. Obviously, we love to give working code to customers. If you think that we could better explain what the code is doing or maybe link off to something else, that's a great addition. A caveat there as well, code snippets are not translated. So if for customers who are trying to read our Microsoft Docs in any of our 40-something, 50-something translated languages, the comments in the code will not be translated because they're considered code, even though they're comments. So everything that's inside the code that is valuable should also be outside the code block in plain text. So if you find us writing something super important in a comment in English, but it's not outside the code block, and so it's not translated, that is a really good article contribution that could make the doc better for everyone in the community. Please keep that in mind when you're reading Learn articles as well. Another really good idea to get started, the call to action, is FAQ articles. We have a lot of frequently asked questions articles about a variety of topics. Some are more distributed, some we have like a consolidated FAQ article. These are really great articles for community contributions because FAQ articles are often asking questions about the interoperability of different things. Does this work with that? Or it's asking questions about like what best use cases are. Where does this fit in the market? And a lot of times Microsoft tries to define the market really well, but customers know kind of where things fit together more intuitively sometimes because they're seeing a broad aspect of things. So FAQ articles are also a great place to start. And so if you take any call to action, these are some ideas: notes and cautions, script samples and code blocks, and then FAQ articles are a great place to get started. How? I'll show you in this presentation. All right. Why contribute to Microsoft Docs? I want to answer this question too to make sure. So you can prevent mistakes that others could make or traps that others could fall into with your own lessons learned. And in that way, everyone in the community can benefit by that, right? You can show your manager. Absolutely, show your manager contributions to your product area and your career, perhaps demonstrate leadership in a technical area. If you're a consultant, show your clients, hey, I helped contribute to this thing. Here's my name at the top of the article. And you can see that, and I'll show you how later. You can get your name known to content developers, program managers inside your area of expertise inside Microsoft, and you can be seen as a resource to them and be known to them. We know who our favorite external contributors are. I know who my favorite external contributors are through their GitHub contributions and interactions, usually by their GitHub name. So you can establish your own personal brand, obviously for MVP recognition or as a contributor, if not an expert in your area. And then finally, we have a series of contributor spotlights inside Microsoft Learn that are nominated from folks inside Microsoft. These spotlights interview people both internal and external to Microsoft who have contributed to docs for those going above and beyond to contribute to docs. So for example, all of these, for more than a year now, we in the Azure Developer Community blog have been publishing regular spotlight articles based on interviews with contributors. Again, some of these folks are Microsoft employees, but they're in the field. This is not their job to work on docs, but they're field people who contribute to docs, or these are people who are outside of Microsoft. They're MVPs or people who are soon to be MVPs who get interviewed to talk about their career, talk about what they do, talk about Microsoft Learn. And so these spotlights are nominated by the docs teams, the same people who are going to be reviewing and signing off on your contributions in GitHub in pull requests. So this would be a very nice item to add to your MVP activity report as well. Okay, let's talk about Microsoft Docs and how you use them. Docs is an actively developed website with lots of engineering behind it. So I want to give you a map of navigating these docs. This will go pretty quickly. I'm not going to explain every button on here, but I want to show some of the new stuff and some of the cool stuff that you should be aware of. So right away, this little cluster of buttons across the top has changed recently. The plus button is this thing I was talking about earlier. This allows you to save links to a collection that I mentioned earlier. And that collection can be a way to organize docs into groups that you might have for a specific project or a problem that you're working on or a certification exam. And you can save all these docs alongside other Microsoft Learn articles, alongside Q&A articles, alongside external pages as well, to gather all your materials into one place. And then you can actually share that collection as well. This feedback button is let me talk about these two buttons right here. So the feedback button brings you to submit immediate feedback to the article in the forms of a thumbs up and a thumbs down with some text. We call that a verbatim feedback. It's not a two-way form of communication, but if you want to report that something is broken or, hey, you should mention this or something like that, you could do this in the feedback. However, a more complete way to provide this feedback directly to the docs folks that is not anonymous but is connected to your GitHub name is to use this pencil button. So this, and I'm going to talk about this pencil button more. I'm going to walk you through how to create a pull request, but this pencil button starts you on the process of creating a new GitHub pull request. And if you don't know what a pull request is, I'm going to explain that whole thing. You'll understand by the end of this, don't worry. I'm going to talk in detail about that. Okay, over here, this is relatively new as well. I think this arrived last year. These are additional resource links automatically generated by a machine learning algorithm, just kind of guessing based on other users' traffic about where you might want to go next and other things that are interesting, automatically generated right here in the page. Up here, we have one of two search boxes. So this search box up here in the top right searches the entire technology stack that you're in. So for example, all of Azure. And from that results page, you can then expand your search to all docs. The other search box, which is over in the left in the TOC, it's helpful if you understand how this works. This only searches the titles of articles in the current table of contents. So if you want to totally search for something else in Microsoft Learn, you should use the top right one. If you want to search for something, you're already in the TOC, you know exactly what the title of the article or what keywords in that title might have. This is the best way to search for that because it's going to come up right away. You might find this more convenient than a wider scoped search in this one. Okay, in the top of every article, in the center of the first page, you're going to see a mini table of contents and navigation links that immediately jump to the article's major headings. These are the H2s in the Markdown as well. And then here, and not every page has this if it's too obvious, but in a lot of spaces where we have a lot of different platforms for different things. So like SQL Server, there's like more than a dozen different platforms and versions of SQL Server that appear in the docs. You'll find this applies to link with a hyperlink to each product's name. This hyperlink brings you to a navigation guide, which has a really helpful breakdown. So if you're not quite sure what the difference is between SQL database and SQL managed instance, you can click on these things and it'll help give you a breakdown of what products are what, where they fit in the space, and links to more information on those kind of things. So if you see something in there that's not, you're not quite familiar with that, you should be able to click on those links. So as a quick aside on that topic, if it says applies to SQL Server, it probably means only the what might be called the box product or the year versioned product, so like SQL Server 2022 or something like that, or the version of SQL Server that you can get in an Azure SQL VM, right? It does not mean, if it says applies to SQL Server, it does not mean Azure SQL Database. Has the same database engine, but a different platform. It does probably not mean Azure SQL Managed Instance, which is full SQL Server, but it is its own platform, so some features are not there, right? We try to pay a lot of attention to this applies to line. It's very important. There's a lot of metadata around this kind of thing too, which helps populate the TOCs. The table of contents on the left-hand side. There's metadata about where an article should appear, for example. So we try to pay a lot of attention to this. If you spot something that doesn't look quite right to you, that is a good contribution to potentially make to bring us via the methods that I'm talking about in this presentation today, right? So if there's any questions about the way to explain the differences between those Azure SQL offerings, I'd be happy to explain in this meeting, by the way, but also it's explained to you in this link that you'll probably see in the applies to at the top of most pages. Again, wide open to Q&A if you have any. Okay, let's keep going. Each header in this article is linkable directly. So if you hover on something, and there's going to be this little anchor, the little chain thing that it connects to a link. You can hover over that heading. You can see the little link graphic appear. You can then copy the URL. You see at the top there's a pound icon. That is a page anchor. So if it's a very tall article, you could link directly to a heading at the bottom of the article, and those headings will have those kind of things there. And that link icon appears when you hover, and that's how you get one of those deep links into the article, right? Note that the anchor then is appended to the URL. That's just basic web stuff. Finally, the bottom left-hand corner, you see that there's a download PDF option. You may have seen some communication in the past. This feature was going to be disabled. We heard some good feedback in the community that this is actually really important for some customers who have limited offline access, limited internet access in their workstations, and they have to kind of they have to jump through hoops to get access to the internet, and so these downloadable PDFs are actually super useful for documentation. So we do have a new system for offline docs in downloads coming soon, so watch for some features in this space, but this is an option. We have other ways to do offline docs as well. I actually want to talk about that in a little bit. Okay. And let's talk about this article too. We've been kind of zooming around just the Learn website, but I want to talk specifically about this article, this What's New page. And there's lots of What's New pages. There's also What's New in Fabric. There's What's New in Azure SQL Managed Instance. There's lots of What's New pages. So we use What's New pages for SaaS and PaaS offerings We don't use what's new pages for something like SQL Server 2022. That's where we have release notes. Azure Arc for SQL also has release notes because those are iterative and the customer kind of has to opt into those. You have to install CU to get those things. For what's new articles, you learn about everything that's coming to the platform for you. That's automatically there. And SaaS and PaaS offerings, that's automatically loaded for you, right? So these what's new articles in various areas are great for inspiring your own learning. They're great for inspiring content. If you're going to make a blog post about something or talk about social media, just to keep up with everything that's going on, these What's New articles are great for that. They're also an authoritative list of what is in preview and what has become generally available. That's really important for some customers who have like a corporate policy that we cannot use Azure preview features or products or components or things like that. So if you're a technical blogger or a content creator, the What's New page for the various services out there, and there's lots of What's New articles, these are gold mines for content inspiration. So you can learn and talk about the latest stuff in the product. So for example, a feature that just went from preview to GA, or a feature that is new to preview, or these will all be great topics for a blog, for content, things like that. Okay, let's talk about offline stuff real quick. If your work environment is behind an air-gapped network, or if you work in high security environments, like I talked to a guy who worked in a nuclear power plant, right? And in this nuclear power plant, he had to go into one building to work and had to go in another building to get on the internet. And they were completely separated. He had to like walk across the street and stuff like that. So he had to go and download content and then like print it out and walk it back into the secure building, right? So you can do all that through Management Studio. You can get SQL Server documentation this way. You can do this. So for example, SQL Server 2014, which just dropped out of support, the only way to get the specific 2014 content is actually to use these offline process as well. If you want to see what the docs look like for SQL 2014, right? So I don't know how many of you work with offline environments or those kind of constrictions, but they're more and more common these days. But this kind of documentation is actually kind of a strategic advantage for us, right? So there's very large organizations in the public sector, lots of military stuff. There's very large private sector organizations that you'd see on like the Fortune 500 list. They want their development environments internal and secured from away from the public internet. And in the case of Microsoft documentation for SQL Server and Power BI and Azure and Fabric and a lot of these other products, the documentation is hosted in GitHub, and therefore you can easily clone it. It's all markdown. You should be able to render for the most part. There's some custom stuff in there that only shows up on our website properly. But there's some markdown in there, and you have access to the docs by cloning a repo. It's really fast. It's really easy. So you can get the best of both worlds, a secure network for development and then access to the fresh product documentation on a regular basis. So all of this stuff is out there for you to use if you're in an online if you're in an offline work environment. Okay, so this is a data conference. So speaking of Management Studio, not a lot of people are aware of this, but when you have any text highlighted and you hit F1 in Management Studio, this also works, by the way, in SQL Server Data Tools. It works in all of Visual Studio, but hey, this is a data, so I'm talking about Management Studio. The browser should bring you right to the article. So I've got the online keyboard here, and you can see that I've highlighted just the name of that DM exec sessions dynamic management view, right? I highlighted that, Control F1, or I'm sorry, just F1, and it brings you right to the help, right? This assumes that your workstation has access to the internet, of course, and that you have selected the help preference in Visual Studio for open it in browser. This will bring you directly to the right Microsoft Online Docs article. If you hit F1 on some syntax or a keyword or some type of code, and it doesn't bring you to the right article, or it brings you to like a super generic article, that might actually be something we could help fix in Docs. So that is something you could help address in product feedback and a pull request. And we'll talk about that soon. Okay, I'm going to grab a drink of water. Any questions? I'll talk about versioning next. Any questions so far?
There currently are no questions, but great tips anyway, actually.
Yeah, good. I hope this is useful.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I just got a tickle in my throat. Okay, great. So let's talk about versioning. I mentioned this real quickly with the applies to things earlier. Where it makes sense, the same document is going to include different information for different products mentioned. This is kind of a way the Docs as code thing can programmatically change what a document shows depending on what version you have requested. So we may use the same article for various versions of SQL Server, like Windows versus Linux, or different releases of SQL Server, like 16, 17, 19, 2022, or different Azure platforms of SQL Server, so like SQL Server versus Azure SQL Database versus Azure SQL Managed Instance, stuff like that. So for example, here's a code snippet from the actual Markdown showing this custom Monica range metadata that's specific to Microsoft, and the specific Monica range text in the trim article, right? And you can see when it's in different areas that it's going to be showing different content depending on what you have selected. So if the doc doesn't quite look right because of specific version detail, or you think it doesn't work in the platform that you're on, take a look at the version that you're in. That version drop-down list in the left side, which I have on the screen right here, this thing will show you what version you have selected the documentation for. So make sure you're looking for the right one. Sometimes we'll handle versioning in more visible ways, like via a tab, or we'll clearly state versions in the applies to row at the top of an article, or we'll use colorful note boxes throughout to make sure that you make sure what like version differences there may be. But you know, for a lot of time, this is one of many tools that we have. We'll just kind of change the articles, what it displays depending on the version that you show. Also note that for content that is specific to older versions of SQL Server before SQL Server 2016, we do have ways to access that content, even if it's offline only. I showed that earlier. Yeah, we only go back to 2016 now with a lot of the docs. So, and while we do support we do have content for all supported versions of SQL Server, just a friendly reminder that SQL Server 2014 extended support ended in July a couple months ago. So if you're still running any 2014 in production, you need to get that migration plan in place and start that project. Okay, good stuff. Any questions? Happy to pause, but I'll keep going. So anybody can contribute to Microsoft Docs. We even have a step-by-step tutorial at this URL to guide you through the process of creating a pull request. So if you're watching this recording, go head out there. It's going to give you a step-by-step of everything I'm about to talk about. I'm going to show you though right now. So by contributing to Microsoft Docs for any product technology, you can be part of the community and help edit docs that everyone uses. And we'll talk about this contributor designation at the top of the article where your GitHub picture and your GitHub name can be listed at the top of an article that you helped to improve. We average 150 million page views a month, so that's not nothing. We have about a dozen million, that's a weird way to say it, we have about 12 million in SQL Docs alone. And if you want, you can do this entirely in the browser, github.com, with nothing to download and nothing to install, entirely within the browser. You can also use, of course, your own local tools. It's all in Git, so if you know how to use Git, if you're a developer, you can use Git, VS Code. I use Git and VS Code every day to contribute to Docs, but all you really need is a free GitHub account and a browser. So let's walk through it. First off, GitHub authentication. You really should enable two-factor authentication on your GitHub account. This is required for corporate repositories, including for Microsoft employees to contribute to Microsoft internal repositories. I'll talk about how we use those before the end of this presentation. I recommend not using only your phone or a phone app for this. I've had Microsoft folks, had a Microsoft engineer lose his phone, and then he got a new one and he found himself unable to get into his GitHub account. So definitely recommend not just using your phone number. SIM swap attacks are too common these days for bypassing multi-factor authentication. A hardware key with backup copies of that hardware key is a slightly more expensive commodity. They're pretty cheap, but that's probably a better choice than using something that is phone-based for GitHub. And look, take this seriously, regardless of the method of your multi-factor authentication. Make sure to also download and save your two-factor authentication recovery codes if you haven't already. Take your two-factor auth seriously because you can lock it out and accidentally lose access to your GitHub account if you don't have these recovery codes. If you lose your device, if you lose whatever multi-factor authentication method you're using and you don't have these backup recovery codes, your account cannot be recovered. This is a shock to people who work at Microsoft, and we bought GitHub. This could have, for example, these recovery codes could have helped that Microsoft engineer I mentioned earlier get access to his GitHub account all over again. You can access your backup recovery codes in your GitHub account settings under account security. Go there now. And hey, while you're in GitHub settings, Did you know that there's a GitHub dark mode now? Can I get a woot woot for dark mode apps? There's a couple ways to change your theme in GitHub. There's a lot of different themes in GitHub, including syncing your account's settings automatically to your Chrome or Windows appearance settings for night and day. That's pretty cool. What other dark mode stuff do we have? Oh, we have dark mode in Microsoft Learn. So if you're an enthusiast for dark mode like I am, learn.microsoft.com, the thing that we're talking about today, has a dark theme too. You can check it out at the footer of any page to change to dark mode. Also, dark mode has arrived in Power BI. It has arrived. Oh, I got animations here. They're not. Let's see. Are they playing? Yeah, they've arrived in Power BI. They've arrived in Office apps. They've arrived in LinkedIn. All the Office apps. Here we go. Dark mode, dark mode, dark mode. Even in the Xbox Game Pass page. How about that? How cool is that? Love dark mode. Not seeing the usual round of applause for dark mode. I'll just take this as silent applause that you're too busy clapping to type. That's okay. I know some people hate dark mode. That's fine. I love dark mode stuff. Dark mode, work in a cave all day long. So enough about dark mode. What belongs in docs and in pull requests? So to be clear, support issues, this is not documentation feedback. If you're having a support issue, reach out to your support or your support partner. Docs feedback methods that we're talking about today, there's no SLA for response time. So if you're having a problem with unexpected behavior, an error message, or an outage, and you need help troubleshooting, contact Microsoft support or your support partner. So the docs features that we're going to talk about how to contribute is not the place to start. As accessible as they are, because you're on the article and you're yelling at the article, this is not the place to start, right? So we triage incoming issues and pull requests from GitHub, and it sounds like a support issue. Issue will probably be closed up with a polite message, maybe some links from a PR, or it'll just be ignored, right? So for product issues, product feedback, again, contact support at your support partner. For support issues, contact support. For product issues, for product feedback, we have other places for that too that's not docs. So if you say, hey, the app should do this, or the feature should do this, or it shouldn't do this, feedback.azure.com is a great place to start. So for SQL, because I know this is a data platform area, easy to remember, aka MS SQL feedback. Real easy to remember that link to go and say, hey, the next version of SQL Server should do XYZ, right? You might remember in the past we had Connect items, and then we had user voice systems. So those are all in the past. This has been replaced by a new system hosted at feedback.azure.com. And most of those old ideas from those older systems have been migrated, though for privacy reasons, the comments from external users have been removed from our site where the product ideas were migrated. So a lot of these things are going to show up, but they'll just be anonymized. Feedback.azure.com hosts product feedback channels for many Microsoft products and technologies, not just SQL Server. And so you can see the link right there. Okay, so for docs feedback, though, so not a product problem or request, docs feedback will address the documentation itself. So most documentation pull requests that get merged, that get attention, are a request to fix something that is missing or outdated or wrong, or a request to add something that would have helped prevent an error or an outage, etc. So maybe after your support ticket is closed and you figured out what the problem was, then you have information to make a good contribution to a document. Okay. Last bit, yes. To submit an issue, this has evolved recently. We'd much rather receive PRs. That's a message and a takeaway I want you to have. We'd much rather receive a pull request where you are suggesting the actual change, or at least getting started with the actual change to the article with a commit that we could then merge in to the articles. You can submit that feedback, which is kind of like that one-way communication, but there's no way for us to ask qualifying questions. There's no way for us to recognize you for the contribution to the article as well. So pull requests are really the best way to achieve those two goals, right? That we could have a conversation about this kind of thing. We could ask, hey, what version are you using? Or hey, can you reproduce it this way? Or something like that. Again, we're not troubleshooting the product, but we're helping to improve the docs. And then you get contribution credit for that in a pull request. So really, we would much rather receive your pull requests. I'm going to talk about how to do that. Okay. So you found something that is in the documentation that is out of date or wrong or missing. You want to add some stuff. You want to suggest the edits yourself. To get started with the pull requests, you click on the pencil icon that we showed earlier, top right corner of an article, right? The red box right here. And then clicking the pencil on the top of the document will bring you to the GitHub preview page for that article. This is a GitHub rendered preview of the markdown of the article. So from here, click the pencil button again. So again, 2 pencil button clicks, top right corner. Now you're looking at the actual markdown code. You may have to fork the repo. If this is the first time you're doing this, you just hit the green button to fork the repo, assuming you're logged in at GitHub. But here, you're now looking at the actual markdown code in the text box, right? This is not what you see is what you get editor. It is the markdown. There is some formatting to help you out there. So it might surprise you to learn Microsoft Docs are not edited in Microsoft Word, but rather in code. In Markdown, and some articles are in YAML, which is another plain text markup language for rendering rich text. So Markdown is a lightweight text language created for formatting rich text with a plain text editor. And GitHub has their own formal implementation of Markdown called GitHub Flavored Markdown. Many different online sites use Markdown, though. So if you think you don't know Markdown, you might. So GitHub, GitLab, Reddit, Stack Exchange, Bitbucket, Drupal, all of these products use Markdown. So you might already be writing more Markdown than you think. It's also similar but different. It's similar to a wiki language kind of thing too. Plain text to generate rich text. You might be more familiar with Markdown than you think already. So as you can see, it's mostly plain text, right? Make your changes here in the text box. If you're not familiar with Markdown, again, it's pretty easy to understand once you get rolling. You don't have to worry about it being perfect. Again, perfection is not expected in a pull request. The content team, somebody like me, will always review your content submission, potentially tweak it for Microsoft standards for style, capitalization, bold, italics, things like that, before it's merged live. So you don't have to worry about that stuff. Just focus on the content. There's plenty of resources online for basic Markdown syntax, but again, if you don't get something quite right, don't sweat that. Okay, once you're done making your changes, hit the big green button. In GitHub, you mostly just hit big green buttons. It's really easy to remember that stuff. Hit the big green button to start proposing your changes by committing your changes to your own branch. And then you'll get some messages to enter comments about your commit itself. And then you will have information about how to create your pull request's title and comments. The default commit message is fine. It will be public, but the default is fine. Make it informative if you want. If you're not familiar with GitHub terminology like pull requests and commit, that's okay. You don't have to be. Again, you're just kind of filling in boxes and hitting big green buttons, right? It's doing all this work on the back end for you. Once you hit the big green propose changes button, we'll take it from there. We'll keep you updated as your pull request moves through a process. Your changes will be proposed for merge. They'll be triaged first by automated systems and then by some human reviewers and then by somebody like me, a content developer. We'll take it from there. We'll reply to the pull request in comments. We'll make further edits if necessary, and eventually we'll decide whether or not to merge your changes, and you'll be notified along the way with feedback directly from one of us on the content team. Again, you could do all of this through your own tooling if you want to create your own fork, branch, commits, pull, and push your commits up to a pull request. That's what we do on the content teams every day, but if you want to just use github.com website to handle the entire process for you, that's easy. So again, let's talk about your pull request process. It will be assigned to human reviewers. Human and automated messages from the build engine will appear in the conversation tab of your pull requests. You can select the files change tab to review your changes line by line. Others can make comments or suggestions to your changes as well. So let's look at a pull request. This is what it looks like after you've submitted a pull request. You can see that this is an open pull request. First, automated systems check in. You'll see some PR merger automator stuff like that, adding metadata, adding tags, assigning some Microsoft staff to it. Human authors and reviewers are assigned, and both human and automated messages show here in the conversation tab. So this blue arrow here that I'm pointing to, that's the actual commit, and that's in the chain, it's in the conversation. That's where the change happened, right? So let's keep looking down here. If you have another edit to make, that's easy. So you can use github.com to easily make more changes. And so you can even make more changes to other articles. You can have multiple articles updated in the same branch. A branch is part of the pull request, right? You can see that this one has 2 edits here. Kendra has added 2 commits to this branch. 2 commits show up in the conversation tab. A branch can include one or many commits for one or many files, and a pull request is simply a relationship between 2 branches, your branch and Microsoft's branch. So how do you go about adding another commit? So You come up here to your branch here. You can see it's automatically created a branch just by patch 6. It's just going to automatically iterate those numbers. You can click on the link to the branch in your fork. That's your copy of the files. There's this red box right here that shows you can add right here. You can then make more edits to this file. You can make more edits to other files just by opening up those files. Your PR will start with an open status. Let's look at one that is already merged, which means it's been accepted, and soon it'll be merged live to the live production repository, and then it'll usually be on the website within a day. So this was an excellent pull request worth showing off. You can see what GitHub did here automatically in the background was to create that fork again, patch 1. That just means it's the first one that they've worked on. You can delete those things and reset the numbers. So the pull request includes the commit here again, which is in the pull request log right here with the red arrow. Let's see down at the bottom, the pull request log contains automated and manually created messages, automation from the merge engine. You can see some of these things. Eventually, someone on the content team like myself, and you can see what I've done here at the top of the page, will review, maybe make some more edits. Often we will go and tweak something like this or that. And then sign off on this change to have it merged. And you'll see those comments too. You'll receive an email anytime anyone uses your username with the @ symbol. So you see how I said, nice catch, Vlad DBA. And you can respond in conversation at the bottom here with the comment button. Again, big green buttons on GitHub. So what did this pull request change? So we'll go to the Files Change tab here. So once your pull request is created, both you and Microsoft can review the changes. It's actually all public. Anybody can review these changes and comment on them as well. So this is the Files Change tab, which shows an in-browser diff. Red is the old, green is the new, and the change characters are highlighted. You can actually use this in 2 different ways. If you're not used to seeing it side by side and you'd rather do like a more stacked comparison, you can do a unified view on this little gearbox right there that will change it to look like this. So same changes here. And you can see this update makes the sentence clear. Perhaps the sentence didn't translate well or was vague or unclear. This is a good edit, right? If you're trying to describe how something should change, simply making the change yourself is a way to communicate this. Rather than trying to describe, hey, in the 4th paragraph, in the 2nd sentence, you could rewrite it to be better or clearer. Show, don't tell, right? This is a great way to do that, and you can clearly communicate what you think would make the documentation better. Again, if you want to make something better and you want to make another edit to your file, you can also click the 3 dots here and then click Edit File. You can edit the same file. Again, hit the big green button. You can add another commit to the same file to the same branch, and that will be included in the same open pull request. All right.
We have a question coming in. William?
Oh, great. What languages when contributing? Great, Fabian. Great question. So if you go to so the documentation is all written in English, right? So if you want to edit the article, it will appear to be in English to you in the Markdown. If you would like, I have a slide later on that talks about how to contribute. Let me stop this from because it's distracting. If you like, there's a couple links I'm going to show you later on about how to submit translations. Issues like, hey, this didn't translate well, you submit that in a different channel, or how to submit technical feedback in another language. If you're not familiar with English, if you'd rather communicate through any other language, you can do that. You can submit the same kind of thing in this feedback in your language. It'll be translated and routed to the correct team. Good question, Fabian. But yes, definitely I'll have a slide about that, and I'll come back to that soon. Okay, so this is I want to show this off because GitHub introduced this only in the past year or two, an in-browser suggestion. This is a really easy way to collaborate on a pull request. It's kind of similar to like the Microsoft Word comments feature, right? We do this internally between the docs, the product teams, and engineering teams at Microsoft, right? So minor edits, like the ones we've talked about before, can be suggested entirely within the browser in this existing pull request, and then you can comment and suggest these changes. So you can hit that Add Suggestion button, make a change right here, and that will show up then as a proposed commit. So I want to show this off because this is a really easy way to make these changes and have them be collaborative. I can, as the author of the pull request, then accept the change. The commit will show up as co-authored by both of us. in the pull request in the branch, right? So now you're editing the line or the lines that you've selected with that blue plus button. That blue plus button is kind of the key here. It's going to show up in the loop again. And so when you're editing this, you can start a review to submit multiple things. Yeah, see the blue plus button right there. You can submit multiple things, or you can make many different suggestions to many different parts of this article and then submit them all at once with that start a review feature in GitHub. And here's another way that the blue plus button is action this with a dark mode background, as you can see. This is another, the blue plus button. You can see I can click and drag multiple lines. You hit that add a suggestion button again. Now I am submitting a suggestion for multiple lines. All of this makes it really easy to collaborate with doc authors and reviewers entirely within github.com in the browser. So after you've submitted your feedback, you're happy with the changes, you can sit back. If the PR is ready, you'd have no more changes to make. We got it from here, and we'll let you know if we have any questions or have a status update. So let's put a recap on this. Eventually, someone inside Microsoft, usually the content developer or the author of the article, will write pound sign off in the pull request comments. This is an automation custom to Microsoft. And the sign off comment starts a process behind the scenes. More information shows up in the PR log. If it's small enough and it qualifies for a few different criteria, it might just be quickly and automatically merged into the branch. But commonly, depending on the amount of change or some other factors, a human editor will review and merge the pull request. This is someone non-technical who will review for compliance and style, in addition to someone a human who is technical to review for things like that. And then once merged, the doc will be published live. We usually publish twice a day, around 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And then because of content delivery networks and things like that, it usually is live about an hour later. Some repos have a third publishing window in the morning around 4 a.m. Pacific. Okay. So once you've contributed via a pull request, we will merge your commit into the document. You'll get mentioned in the internal contributors pop-up window on every doc with your GitHub profile and link. So the folks listed here are folks both inside and external to Microsoft who have submitted comments to an article via a pull request, not feedback, right? Just via a pull request. So worth mentioning that if you start a pull request, even if we close it and we pull your commit into a different pull request, perhaps we might pull your commit into the internal repository, your commit will still be in the chain and you'll still be recognized here, even if your pull request was closed. All of these contributions can be part of your MVP application and renewal activity. Fair warning that yes, these are examined. Again, we want quality, not quantity. They don't weigh, something that is just grammar or syntax or a typo will not weigh as heavily as contributions to actual technical content. Okay. Let's talk about some tips on contributions. I've walked you through the whole process. It should be real easy to know where to click pencil buttons and then click green buttons. That's pretty much how GitHub works, right? So we want you to contribute. Stop worrying about this. Let's not be afraid of the pull request. If you're not sure how it should change, exactly. If you're not sure the complete solution here, just get us started. Give it a shot. If it's not quite right, if it's not formatted perfectly, again, don't worry. If it's not complete, don't worry about that. We'll adjust. But at least it gets fixed. At least it gets attention. So don't be afraid to submit a pull request. Here's some other notes to ease your anxiety about contributing, right? Images, graphics, charts. So we have designers that we use to get images updated in a standardized way. There's no need to edit images yourself, although you could make suggestions if you want, like with alt text changes or with anything else in the Markdown, for example, in the pull request. Finally, capitalization is tough in SpongeBob font, right? The capitalization of various features and products inside Microsoft is one of the more nuanced bits that there is about publishing docs. Marketing always wins these arguments, right? Regardless of how products documentation evolved throughout the development process before it even went public, marketing always gets to decide what gets capitalized, what the name of something is. So we'll sometimes get pull requests that come through that make a lot of capitalization changes. And these capitalization changes are well-intentioned. They're trying to make things more consistent, but sometimes they're misguided. This task is tricky enough when you have information directly from the source, like I do. It's tricky enough. So typically we handle capitalization like that well enough. If you spot inconsistencies between marketing content, documentation content, training content, or within multiple documents, we're regularly working on that stuff internally, but don't be afraid to point something out. But don't be surprised if it's like, yeah, this is actually capitalized or this is not capitalized because of this and that. Product names and feature names are actually the trickiest. When a generic word is in the product, right? So just because we have a product called Azure SQL Database does not mean that every word database is now capitalized, right? A lot of times we're just talking about database generic or your database or the customer database, and that's lowercase. Or Azure Functions, for example, versus just, a function. So try to remember that when you go to Taco Time, and Taco Time is a fast food restaurant up here in Washington State in the United States. When you go to Taco Time, you order a lowercase taco. You do not order an uppercase taco just because uppercase taco is in the name, right? Um, just an aside, Taco Time, if you ever come to Washington State, does not ship their tacos with something called flavor. I'm from Louisiana, where our food always has flavor, and Taco Time doesn't do flavor so much. So you have to kind of add your own seasoning and hot sauce to it, stuff like that. Okay. Capitalization is even more difficult for internal partners and customers because capitalization often means a product or a service name shouldn't be translated or can't be translated or should be translated in a specific way. But a lowercase common noun of the same term should be translated, right? So translation is difficult enough, right? So it's important that we get this right. And inconsistency in capitalization can confuse translators and confuse customers too. I mentioned this before. When it comes to comments and code, comments are great. Everyone should comment their code, but code isn't translated. So docs must explain code outside the code snippet. If you see code that doesn't properly explain what it's doing outside of the code snippet, that's a good pull request to help explain what the code does in plain language that will be translated. That's a good contribution right there. And then when it comes to grammar, when it comes to style, capitalization, when it comes to code comments, and everything that we've talked about today, the core goal of our brand voice is to, above all, be simple and human. So we don't want to be too informal, but we want to use common words. We want to stay away from jargon, from highly academic terms, extremely technical terms that would confuse some customers. Even if they're technically accurate, we want to stay away from those. We want to be simple and plain and human. So let's make sure that writing docs that are helpful and approachable for everyone. If we could do better, hey, that's what we're talking about today. Let us know. Okay, I see a question in the comments here. Is it a good idea to make contribution on public previews, or does this have to be GA? Absolutely. You are totally welcome to make contributions on public preview docs. So even if the doc says preview, you can still make pull requests to that kind of thing. In fact, that kind of contribution feedback might even be more valuable than before when it goes GA. Yes, of course, when you're not on NDA. Of course, if you're in a private preview or something that is locked behind an NDA, it probably won't be in public docs anyway. So you would use the feedback methods that the private preview, for example, has laid out for you, something like that. You would not use docs. Yeah, good question, Fabian. Okay. This is the link that I want to talk about earlier, Fabian, for submitting for two things. For either submitting feedback in a different language or submitting feedback about a translation issue. So if you've got a translation issue to Rees, all of those are submitted via Microsoft 365 form. Submit your form any language. It will be translated and routed to the correct localization team. Per the localization team, this feedback is triaged within 24 hours, and if valid, and if it will be fixed within 1 to 2 weeks. If you've got a technical issue with an article and you're more comfortable submitting your issue or your feedback in another language besides English, no problem. Instead of creating a pull request in English, you can use that same form. It will be translated and passed to the proper content teams, like a SQL Docs team. Behind the scenes, that form creates a DevOps item in somebody's workload, so it's not going to be ignored. It's going to be there. Either way, thanks for contributing to make Microsoft Docs better for everyone, everywhere. Okay, good stuff. Good questions so far. I think I'm almost at time, but let me walk through. Yeah, Olivier, how much time do I have? Do I have 3 minutes or 33 minutes?
We can be flexible. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
good.
It's
good.
personal, so that's fine.
Yeah, okay. I want to walk through one more thing, which kind of describes how GitHub works and then how we use GitHub to publish documentation. So I think this is useful. You've seen how you can use GitHub to contribute to docs. I want to show you some inside baseball, talk about how we use it, right? So again, Microsoft Docs are edited in Markdown. We spend most of our time in VS Code or Azure Data Studio to edit docs. We have other tools to help with automated links checking, with syntax formatting. We have tools for bulk updates. We have includes. We have a series of include files to tokenize things like a product name. So if a product name changes, we can change it with just one quick file change. We have a rich set of metadata for each article. We do pay attention to how articles perform in terms of search engine optimization, traffic patterns, and trends, all driven through Azure Analytics and Microsoft Fabric internally. We try to improve poorly performing articles, and we use many metrics to track the performance of an article, including, for example, if you use copy or if you copy text from an article, that's great. That's interaction with the article. That means the article helped you find something. If you click through, if you scroll, as you dwell, the same metrics that any website uses for e-commerce or something like that to track how effective a web page is, without capturing any personal information or like wider tracking information off of our site, obviously. Most of our decisions with docs and docs layouts are data-driven. And when we're data-driven, we create better engagement and more useful docs, so we try to follow that lead. For big article updates, we have systems to handle things called a release branch for when you want to work on documentation for months at a time and then release a new product all at once, like during the keynote at Ignite or Build conference or something like that. Many of these strategies are not different from how developers released software all at once with many changes, and they're all merged in at once. And we use some of the same tools. I'm happy to answer questions about that, but let's talk about GitHub. So this is the behind the scenes. If you're absolutely brand new to GitHub, this is the behind the scenes on how Microsoft Docs works in GitHub. But first, I'm going to explain GitHub. If you're new to Git and you don't understand this, don't worry. First off, you saw how easy it is in the docs. You don't actually have to understand how Git works to use github.com, right? But this is the basic GitHub workflow. Let me explain it step by step. So a repository like Azure Docs, which is one of our largest docs repositories. This is where the source is housed for the Markdown and where the website engine pulls Markdown to present you the live pictures and texts on the website. A fork is a copy of that repo associated with your account in GitHub. So everyone who has ever worked on a doc will have a copy, will have a fork of that repo in your GitHub account. This is created for you by GitHub in GitHub with a single click of a big green button. Again, big green button. The first time you interact with that repo, the first time you need it, it'll prompt you to create the fork. To tell the two apart, a common convention is to reference your remote fork as origin and the code base you eventually push to as upstream. And these are called remote names or remotes. These are just common naming conventions. You can actually choose any name. But you'll have an origin and an upstream for each repo that you work in. A clone is a copy of a fork brought down locally. The files are copied to your workstation. They're literally downloading the Markdown to your workstation so that you have the local files and you can start to make edits to them. When you go to make changes to a file or to add or remove files, you'll first create a working branch that is relevant to the chunk of changes that you'll be making. So I just put the ISO date in and then, hey, I'm going to fix this issue, something like that. I'll try to be more specific than this, but you get the idea. You want a branch to contain only the changes for a specific feature or an issue that you're addressing so that it can be treated as an atomic block of changes that go back upstream and it won't be hung up by anything else. So your work goes into this branch. All the commits go into the branch, right? And they go into your local branch, into the clone that you have made, right? Then you will push your branch and all the commits for it to your origin in GitHub, the fork of the code in the GitHub account. Now, GitHub has your information. It's off of your workstation. It has your commits, but Microsoft has no idea that you've done any work yet. It's just in GitHub. It's sitting up there for your benefit only. That's why you create a pull request. A pull request is a comparison between two branches. Here, you'll be asking the Microsoft Docs repository to accept commits from your repository's branch so that your changes can be merged from your fork into the repo's main branch. And that's it. So to be a little closer to reality of how we work internally, we actually have two repositories in the Microsoft Docs account for every repository. We have a copy. The Azure Docs repository actually drives the website, but like true professionals, we don't develop against production. We only develop in a preview repository, Azure Docs PR, for example. and which is not visible to the public, which allows us to work in and preview the merged state of our changes in an actual live repo with the actual docs engine running behind it. And this build process to the live website occurs usually twice a day and is gated by a team of build reviewers. But when you submit pull requests, when you work in it, you don't have to worry about any of that. Your workflow and all the validation necessary occurs in the public Azure Docs repo. This is to show you that we just have two repos and we do a sync between them on a regular basis behind the scenes. This is the same Docs as code pattern that applies to any Microsoft technology in Microsoft Docs. So anything has this, and we have a lot of repos. If there's any questions about this, I'd be happy to chat. But here's some links, and then I'll be done. Again, you can contribute to github.com entirely within the browser with nothing to download. If you're interested in learning more about Git and GitHub, here are some great resources from Microsoft Learn to learn more about Git, GitHub, and using Git version control tools in VS Code. What's some new stuff in Docs? So speaking of giving credits, some important news here. If you use AI to write content, if we use AI to write content, there are some approved AI services to use, and there are some that are not approved. We need to add this metadata tag to the article to properly and ethically acknowledge this. This is already live. This is not optional for Microsoft. The top link there is a contributor guide link to everything that we have about AI-generated content and code simples here. And you can see that we already have a link that is live here, this Managed Resource Groups Python. We have used AI contributions, so we have this little transparency thing. The author created this article with assistance from AI. We want to be transparent and ethical about that. You can link now multiple accounts. If you're like me, I had like a personal account and I've had an account for multiple jobs over the past couple decades. So in this way, you can link multiple accounts into your single Learn profile to serve as kind of a digital resume and a proof of skills of all the certifications, all the training modules you've completed, things like that. So in Learn, when you go to the profile icon at the top in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a settings and then account management, and you can learn more about adding multiple accounts to all be connected to your single Learn profile. If you haven't already noticed, Microsoft also has a new contributor home to go to. This new contributor home page includes new design that has clear calls to action for contribution and connections item options and an FAQ. It shows off our contributor showcase, currently featuring stories for external contributors, like I mentioned earlier. This profile page puts your Learn, your certifications, your Q&A participation, your docs collections, and all that together in one place, including auto detection of your account for certifications, for exams, for any instructor-led training that you've done. And you can then get a transcript of your entire Learn activity for jobs, for your manager, for exams, for historical certifications, all of that kind of stuff. And you can then share that with a secure link. You can also connect your Pearson VUE certification profile to get notifications for certification renewals and more. And I'll link directly to Pearson VUE to schedule exams that you're pursuing. Okay, and we have a new contributor guide in the form of a Learn module. So everything that we covered today is actually in a Learn module that you can take now to learn more about this. So you can cover a lot of what we covered today in the Learn training module format. This was introduced last July in 2023. This is a 9-unit Learn module that has a knowledge check and an exercise to get you rolling with contributing to Docs. We estimate this takes about 30 minutes to complete and includes GitHub contribution, GitHub fundamentals for contribution, and how to edit a published article in a web editor in github.com. Okay, thank you very much.